Steam rises from a massive copper kettle as a head cook plunges his ladle deep into the churning potato soup. His white uniform is already dampened with sweat, though it's only 0700 hours on December 17, 1942. Outside, a biting Chesapeake wind whips across the yard of the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, where 4,000 young men are preparing for morning formation. But inside the industrial kitchen of what would later become known as King Hall, Chief Petty Officer William Hargrove has already been on duty for 3 hours, orchestrating the controlled chaos required to feed an entire brigade of midshipmen whose numbers had swelled beyond all pre-war planning. "2 more batches," he calls out to his assistant cooks, checking his watch. "We've got 23 minutes before they start filing in." The kitchen staff moves with practiced precision, some stirring enormous vats of oatmeal, others transferring hundreds of fresh-baked rolls to serving carts, still others preparing industrial-sized coffee urns. This morning, like every morning during these war years, they would serve breakfast to 4,000 future officers in under 5 minutes. A wartime miracle of logistics that few outside these walls would ever fully appreciate. No one in the commissary division knew that Chief Hargrove's unorthodox methods and quiet defiance of conventional mess operations would rewrite the handbook on institutional feeding during wartime, or that his innovations, born from desperate necessity, would revolutionize how the Navy fed its men, not just at the Academy, but across the entire fleet for decades to come. William Hargrove's path to becoming the mastermind behind the Naval Academy's wartime food service began far from Annapolis. Born in 1904 in Sweetwater, Tennessee, Hargrove was the son of a railroad cook who had fed crews across the Southern lines for 20 years. From his earliest memories, young William understood the art of feeding many men with limited resources. "My daddy always said that an army runs on its stomach, but a railroad runs on its kitchen," Hargrove would later recall in his 1958 memoir, Feeding the Fleet. "He taught me that when you're cooking for 100 men, you aren't just making food, you're maintaining morale, you're building community, and sometimes you're the only thing standing between order and chaos." At 17, Hargrove enlisted in the Navy, partly inspired by his uncle who had served in the Great War. His father would often bring him to the rail yard kitchens, where he learned to scale recipes that could satisfy dozens of hungry workers on tight schedules and tighter budgets. His culinary background quickly directed him toward the commissary branch, where he demonstrated unusual talent for large-scale food preparation. Through the 1920s and 30s, he served on various vessels, from destroyers to battleships, rising through the ranks while developing a reputation for innovative mess management. By 1939, as war clouds gathered over Europe, Hargrove had achieved the rank of Chief Petty Officer and received orders to the United States Naval Academy. The assignment initially disappointed him. He had hoped for a posting on a combat vessel where he felt his skills would directly contribute to the war effort. Little did he know that his position at Annapolis would prove crucial to the Navy's officer development program during America's most significant military challenge. His integration into the Academy kitchen was not without friction. The established mess officers viewed the newcomer with suspicion, particularly when he began questioning traditional practices. "The first month was like navigating a minefield," he later wrote. "I'd suggest a change in the preparation schedule, and you'd think I'd proposed sailing into enemy waters without a compass." Despite this resistance, Hargrove quickly earned respect through his unmatched efficiency and problem-solving skills. Within 6 months of his arrival, he had reorganized the kitchen staffing patterns, revised inventory procedures, and modified equipment layouts to improve workflow. These changes, though seemingly minor, increased meal production capacity by 20% without requiring additional personnel. By early 1941, before America formally entered the war, Hargrove had been promoted to oversee breakfast operations, the most challenging meal service due to tight morning schedules for midshipmen. His effectiveness earned him increased authority, positioning him perfectly to confront the extraordinary challenges that would arise after December 7, 1941. The day Pearl Harbor was attacked, Hargrove had been off duty, enjoying a rare Sunday away from the academy. He was fishing on the Severn River when news spread across Annapolis. By evening, he had voluntarily returned to his post, anticipating the upheaval that would soon transform the Naval Academy's operations. "We knew everything would change," he told his staff that night, "and we need to be ready before they even know they need us to be." As Hargrove had predicted, the attack on Pearl Harbor set in motion a dramatic transformation at the Academy. Graduation schedules were accelerated to meet the urgent demand for officers. The normal four-year program was compressed, with the class of 1942 graduating in December 1941, just days after the attack. Classes that would have graduated in 1943 through 1945 were rushed through in 3 years rather than 4. This acceleration meant that at any given time, the midshipman population was larger than the facility had been designed to accommodate. Additionally, supplementary training programs were established, bringing in reserve officer candidates for short courses. The Academy's population swelled well beyond its peacetime capacity, putting unprecedented strain on all facilities, especially the dining services that Hargrove now helped manage. "We weren't just feeding more mouths," Hargrove noted in a report to his superiors in February 1942. "We were feeding future officers who would soon lead men in combat." Their nutrition, their experience of order and efficiency, their exposure to military discipline, even in how they were fed, all of this was part of their training. The numbers told the story. Pre-war, the Academy mess facilities had been designed to serve approximately 3,000 midshipmen. By mid-1942, they were feeding over 4,000 daily. And unlike civilian institutions that might serve meals over extended hours, military discipline required synchronized meal times. The entire brigade ate together, meaning 12,000 meals needed to be prepared and served within strictly defined windows each day. This challenge was compounded by wartime rationing. Sugar, meat, butter, coffee, all were restricted nationwide. While military installations received priority allocations, they were not exempt from shortages. Hargrove faced the seemingly impossible task of providing adequate nutrition to thousands of physically active young men in training while working with increasingly limited ingredients. By spring of 1942, the situation had reached a critical point. The Academy's traditional meal preparation systems were buckling under the pressure. Lines moved too slowly, food quality was suffering, and growing complaints reached the commandant's office. The Academy leadership considered bringing in outside consultants to overhaul the entire food service operation, an admission of defeat that Hargrove found unacceptable. "Give me 2 weeks," he reportedly told Captain James Holloway, then serving as Commandant of Midshipmen. 2 weeks to fix this before you bring in outsiders who don't understand the Academy or the Navy." Captain Holloway, impressed by Hargrove's confidence but skeptical of his ability to resolve such complex problems, granted him 10 days and the authority to make whatever changes he deemed necessary within the boundaries of naval regulations. What followed would later be known as Hargrove's Revolution in Academy lore. The historical context surrounding Hargrove's challenge extended far beyond the Academy's granite walls. By mid-1942, America's industrial and agricultural resources were straining to support the most expansive war effort in the nation's history. The Navy had grown from approximately 160,000 personnel in 1940 to over 3 million by 1945. Every aspect of American life adjusted to wartime demands, with rationing affecting everything from gasoline to meat to cooking fats. The United States Maritime Commission was launching Liberty ships at unprecedented rates, ultimately producing over 2,700 vessels during the war years. These ships required sailors, and those sailors required training. The Naval Academy's accelerated programs were just one part of a national mobilization that touched every institution. In Annapolis specifically, the town had transformed into a hive of military activity. The academy expanded beyond its traditional boundaries, requisitioning local buildings for additional classroom and housing space. Training exercises filled the Chesapeake Bay, and security measures transformed the once open campus into a restricted zone of military preparation. The academy itself adjusted its curriculum to focus more intensively on wartime skills. Navigation, gunnery, and engineering took precedence over some of the more traditional liberal arts components of officer education. Training became more practical, more urgent, with midshipmen often learning techniques and technologies that had been developed just months earlier in response to combat experiences in the Atlantic and Pacific. Inside this pressure cooker of accelerated training and national emergency, the seemingly mundane matter of feeding midshipmen took on strategic significance. Proper nutrition was essential for physical training. Organized, efficient meal service reinforced military discipline. And the logistical challenges of feeding thousands of future officers mirrored the supply challenges these young men would soon face as leaders in combat theaters worldwide. The traditional academy meal structure consisted of 3 daily servings in a large communal dining hall. Breakfast typically ran from 06:30 to 07:30, with all midshipmen expected to attend during staggered 15-minute windows by company. Lunch service operated from 11:45 to 13:15, again with companies rotating through. Dinner was served from 1730 to 1900. This system had functioned adequately during peacetime, but collapsed under wartime pressures. Expanded enrollment meant more midshipmen trying to eat within the same time windows. Rationing complicated menu planning. Labor shortages, as experienced cooks and staff joined combat units, meant less skilled personnel managing more complex operations. By April 1942, when Hargrove received his mandate to fix the system, mealtimes had become chaotic. Midshipmen spent too much time in lines, often receiving cold food that had been prepared hours earlier. Nutrition suffered, waste increased, and morale declined, all unacceptable conditions for a military academy at war. Hargrove began his overhaul with a radical proposal, abandoning the traditional meal schedule entirely. Instead of staggered 15-minute windows, he proposed that the entire brigade would eat simultaneously. This seemed logistically impossible. The dining facilities simply weren't designed for such volume. But Hargrove had identified the core inefficiency in the existing system: serving lines. "Time spent in lines is time wasted," he wrote in his initial proposal. "Our mission isn't to feed midshipmen in sequence. It's to feed all of them efficiently, nutritiously, and in a manner that reinforces naval discipline." His solution drew inspiration from naval vessels, where space constraints had forced innovative approaches to meal service. Rather than having midshipmen line up for food, Hargrove proposed bringing food to seated midshipmen, a system more akin to restaurant service than institutional feeding. This required a complete reimagining of kitchen operations. He divided the kitchen staff into specialized teams, each responsible for specific components of meal preparation. One team handled proteins, another starches, another vegetables, and so on. Each team prepared their components in massive batches, timed to finish simultaneously just before meal service. The prepared food was then distributed to mobile serving carts, an innovation Hargrove adapted from hospital meal service. Each cart was assigned to serve approximately 20 tables, with a 2-person team managing each cart. The carts were designed with warming compartments to keep food at proper serving temperatures until the moment of delivery. When midshipmen entered the dining hall, they went directly to assigned seats rather than through serving lines. Once seated, the cart teams efficiently distributed pre-plated meals. This system allowed the entire brigade to be served within 5 minutes, an astonishing improvement over the previous 30 to 45-minute process. The new system required precise timing and coordination. Hargrove installed a series of colored signal lights in the kitchen, creating a visual management system that allowed all stations to synchronize their production. A red light indicated preparation phase, yellow signaled final assembly, and green triggered service movement. This simple visual system eliminated the need for verbal commands in the noisy kitchen environment and kept all teams coordinated without constant supervision. Implementation of this new system wasn't without resistance. Traditional mess officers objected to the radical departure from established procedures. Some midshipmen initially complained about the loss of choice offered by serving lines. Kitchen staff required extensive retraining to adapt to specialized roles. Hargrove confronted these challenges with a mixture of persuasion and demonstration. He organized a trial run with a single company, showcasing the efficiency of his system. When that company completed their meal in record time with hot food and minimal waste, skepticism began to fade. Within 2 weeks, the entire brigade had transitioned to the new system, and meal service times had been reduced by 70%. But efficient service was only part of Hargrove's revolution. The wartime rationing of key ingredients presented a separate and equally daunting challenge. The Naval Academy, while receiving priority allocations as a military installation, still faced significant restrictions on meat, sugar, butter, and other essentials. Feeding 4,000 physically active young men nutritious meals under these constraints required culinary creativity beyond standard Navy cookbooks. Hargrove's solution emerged from his childhood experiences in Tennessee, where his family had weathered economic hardships through resourceful cooking. He began incorporating more diverse protein sources, increasing the use of legumes, introducing organ meats prepared in appetizing ways, and emphasizing fish from the abundant Chesapeake Bay. When meat rations were cut by 30% in January 1943, we didn't serve 30% less protein, he later explained. We found 30% more ways to provide protein without relying solely on rationed beef and pork. Hargrove also recognized that perception influenced satisfaction as much as actual ingredients. He worked with Academy nutritionists to develop flavor enhancers that made rationed meals seem more luxurious than they were. Simple techniques, browning butter before use to intensify its flavor, using meat bones to create rich stocks for soups, incorporating aromatic herbs grown in small Academy garden plots, all helped maintain meal quality despite restrictions. Perhaps most significant was Hargrove's approach to desserts during sugar rationing. Rather than eliminating sweet treats, which would have damaged morale, he developed a rotation of desserts that required minimal sugar while maximizing perceived sweetness. Fruit cobblers using naturally sweet apples and berries, custards that emphasized eggy richness rather than sugary sweetness, and clever use of molasses and honey as alternative sweeteners all kept the dessert program viable despite severe sugar restrictions. These culinary adaptations reflected Hargrove's understanding that food wasn't merely fuel, it was a crucial component of morale and psychological well-being for young men preparing for combat. As he noted in a 1944 report, a midshipman who feels well-fed is better able to focus on his studies, his training, and developing the mental toughness needed for war. Our job in the kitchen directly contributes to creating effective officers. By mid-1943, Hargrove's system had proven so successful that Admiral Ernest King, then serving as Chief of Naval Operations, and after whom the dining hall would later be named, ordered a study of the Academy's food service operations for potential implementation across other naval training facilities. Naval observers from training stations in Great Lakes, San Diego, and Norfolk visited Annapolis to study the system. What they found astonished them. Despite wartime restrictions, the Academy was serving nutritionally complete meals to 4,000 midshipmen with greater efficiency and less waste than smaller facilities, feeding half that number. The rising action and dilemma intensified in autumn 1943 when the combined pressures of accelerated graduation schedules and new wartime training programs pushed the Academy's population to its absolute limit. The dining facilities, designed for 3,000, were now serving nearly 4,500 daily, the largest midshipman brigade in Academy history. This population surge coincided with the tightest rationing period of the entire war. The massive Allied buildup for operations in Europe and the Pacific had stretched supply lines to their limits. Even with priority allocations, the Academy's food supplies were reduced to bare minimums. Meat rations were cut to 60% of pre-war levels. Butter became almost non-existent. Sugar allowances were reduced to less than half of normal quantities. Meanwhile, the physical training program had intensified. Midshipmen were undergoing more rigorous conditioning to prepare them for combat assignments, increasing their caloric requirements. Medical officers reported concerns about maintaining proper nutrition for men, burning 4,000 to 5,000 calories daily through academics and physical training. The crisis came to a head in October 1943, when Hargrove received word that scheduled meat deliveries would be delayed by at least 10 days due to transportation prioritization for Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily. With protein stores already at minimal levels, the Academy faced the prospect of inadequate nutrition for future naval officers at a critical moment in their training. Lieutenant Commander Franklin Isherwood, the officer nominally in charge of Academy food services and Hargrove's direct superior, responded with a conventional solution: reduce portion sizes and implement a soup-heavy emergency menu until supplies resumed. This approach, while technically adequate to provide minimal sustenance, would have resulted in undernourished midshipmen struggling through intensive training. "That's not acceptable," Hargrove reportedly told Isherwood in a tense meeting. "These aren't civilians who can supplement their diets elsewhere. They're restricted to campus, training for war, and completely dependent on us for nutrition." When Isherwood insisted that no alternatives existed within regulation, Hargrove made the decision that would define his career. He chose to work around the system rather than within it. "Give me 48 hours," he said. "If I haven't solved this, we'll implement your emergency menu." What followed was a masterclass in resourceful leadership and community engagement that would later be studied at the Naval War College as an example of effective problem-solving under constraints. First, Hargrove contacted local watermen around the Chesapeake Bay. While commercial fishing was subject to wartime controls, subsistence fishing operated under different regulations. Hargrove arranged for Academy launches, normally used for midshipman training, to assist local fishermen in exchange for a share of their catch. Within 24 hours, this improvised partnership had secured over 1,000 pounds of fresh rockfish, bluefish, and Chesapeake oysters. Next, he reached out to the Agricultural Extension Service at the University of Maryland. Learning that local farmers had surplus pork that couldn't be processed through normal channels due to labor shortages at processing plants, he arranged for Academy personnel to assist with butchering in exchange for a portion of the meat. This unorthodox arrangement secured another 800 pounds of pork that would otherwise have been wasted. Finally, and most controversially, Hargrove repurposed a portion of the Academy grounds. A 3-acre decorative garden area was quickly converted into an emergency vegetable garden. Kitchen waste was repurposed as fertilizer, and midshipmen from rural backgrounds were recruited to advise on quick-growing crops. While this garden wouldn't produce immediately, it represented a long-term solution to vegetable shortages and demonstrated resourceful initiative. These extraordinary measures circumvented normal supply chains and regulations in ways that made Lieutenant Commander Isherwood deeply uncomfortable. "You've exceeded your authority," he warned Hargrove. "If this goes wrong, your career is finished." Hargrove's response became legendary at the Academy. "If these midshipmen don't eat properly, their careers may never start. I'll take that risk." When Admiral Wilson Brown, then serving as Academy Superintendent, learned of Hargrove's unconventional arrangements, he called both men to his office. The meeting was described in multiple accounts from those present. Rather than reprimanding Hargrove, the Admiral asked detailed questions about the arrangements, focusing particularly on whether any regulations had been explicitly violated. Hargrove had carefully structured his arrangements to operate within technical compliance while clearly violating the spirit of centralized wartime supply management. No funds had been misappropriated. No supplies had been diverted from military use. No official regulations had been explicitly broken. Yet he had clearly circumvented the intended system. After considering the situation, Admiral Brown made a decision that would later be cited in leadership courses at the Academy. "Chief Hargrove, you're either a supply genius or the most creative rule-bender I've ever encountered," he reportedly said. "Either way, we need more of your thinking in this war." Rather than shutting down Hargrove's improvised supply network, the Admiral officially sanctioned it as an emergency supplementary procurement initiative. He assigned Lieutenant Commander Isherwood to formalize and document the arrangements, effectively making Hargrove's workarounds official while maintaining proper naval hierarchy. This decision not only solved the immediate food crisis, but established a precedent for creative problem-solving that influenced Academy operations throughout the remainder of the war. More significantly, it provided a powerful real-world lesson to midshipmen observing this leadership challenge. Sometimes accomplishing the mission requires thinking beyond established procedures. As Midshipman James Stockdale, who would later become a Vice Admiral and Medal of Honor recipient, recalled in his memoirs, "Watching Chief Hargrove find ways to feed us properly despite impossible constraints taught me more about leadership than any classroom lecture. He showed us that rules matter, but the mission matters more." The climax and heroic act of Hargrove's story unfolded during the winter of 1943 into 1944, as the Academy faced its most severe challenge yet. The combination of expanded enrollment, accelerated graduation schedules, and intensified wartime rationing created what seemed an insurmountable dilemma. In December 1943, the Navy Department issued a new directive reducing institutional food allocations by an additional 20% to support the massive buildup for the planned invasion of Normandy. Even with Hargrove's supplementary procurement network, maintaining adequate nutrition seemed impossible. Medical officers warned that physical training might need to be reduced to match decreased caloric intake, an unacceptable compromise in wartime officer preparation. Lieutenant Commander Isherwood, now working collaboratively with Hargrove rather than against him, proposed the only solution that seemed viable: reduce the midshipman training schedule to account for reduced nutrition. "We can't create food from nothing," he told Academy leadership. "If rations are cut, training intensity must be cut proportionally." For Chief Hargrove, this proposal violated his fundamental understanding of the Academy's mission. Future officers couldn't receive compromised training because of supply challenges. They needed to learn to overcome such challenges. The solution, he believed, wasn't to do less with less, but to do more with less. On December 16, 1943, a date that would later be commemorated annually in Academy food service, Hargrove requested an unprecedented meeting with the entire brigade staff, from the commandant down to company officers. His request was so unusual that it required the superintendent's personal approval, but his reputation by this point had earned him the hearing. In the meeting, Hargrove presented what he called his Integrated Nutrition and Training Initiative, a revolutionary approach to institutional feeding that would fundamentally change how the Academy operated. The core of his proposal was radical: scientific meal planning coordinated directly with physical training schedules. Rather than providing standardized meals across the brigade, Hargrove proposed tailoring nutrition to specific training requirements. Companies engaged in intensive physical training would receive higher-calorie meals with increased protein. Companies focused on classroom work would receive meals optimized for cognitive performance rather than physical exertion. This differentiated feeding approach had never been attempted in any military installation. It required intricate coordination between the physical education department, academic schedulers, and kitchen operations. Each day's meals would need to be planned not just around available supplies, but around the specific activities of different midshipman companies. "The human body doesn't need the same fuel for different tasks," Hargrove explained. drawing on emerging nutritional science he had studied through correspondence with researchers at Johns Hopkins University. A midshipman studying navigation needs different nutrition than one engaged in swimming qualification. We've been feeding them all the same way because it's administratively convenient, not because it's nutritionally optimal. The logistics of implementing this system seemed prohibitive. It would require tracking the schedules of every company, preparing different meal variations simultaneously, and ensuring proper distribution. The administrative burden alone appeared overwhelming. Hargrove had anticipated this objection. He presented a color-coded tray system: blue trays for high-intensity physical training days, green for moderate activity, yellow for primarily academic work. Each midshipman would receive the appropriate tray based on their company's schedule that day. The colored trays would direct kitchen staff to provide the appropriate meal composition without requiring individual customization. This system would allow the kitchen to prepare 3 meal variations rather than dozens, making the process manageable while still tailoring nutrition to requirements. More importantly, it would enable the Academy to maintain full training intensity despite reduced overall food allocations. The assembled officers responded with a mixture of skepticism and interest. The concept was sound in theory, but no one believed it could be implemented within the rigid structures of Academy operations. Captain Holloway, the Commandant, summarized the prevailing view. "Chief Hargrove, this is brilliant thinking, but I don't see how it can be executed within our constraints." Hargrove's response changed Academy history. "Sir, with respect, we've already been testing it for 2 weeks with A and B companies." The revelation stunned the room. Without formal authorization, Hargrove had implemented his system on a limited scale as a proof of concept. He presented data showing that A and B companies, who had unknowingly been receiving optimized nutrition, had improved their physical training metrics despite reduced overall calories. Academic performance remained stable, and importantly, the midshipmen reported higher satisfaction with meals despite actually receiving less food by weight. This unauthorized test demonstrated not just the feasibility of Hargrove's concept, but its effectiveness. Rather than reprimanding him for once again exceeding his authority, Captain Holloway recognized the potential breakthrough. "You've been running this experiment without permission?" "Sometimes asking forgiveness is more efficient than asking permission, sir," Hargrove replied, "especially in wartime." After a moment of tension, Captain Holloway laughed. "I suppose I should be grateful you're feeding midshipmen and not leading them into combat with that attitude." He turned to his staff. "Implement Chief Hargrove's system brigade-wide. I want to see results in 30 days." What followed was the most intensive reorganization of Academy Food Services in its history. The entire mess operation was restructured around the new system. Meal planning became a coordinated effort between nutritionists, training officers, and kitchen staff. Production schedules were redesigned to accommodate multiple meal variations. Distribution systems were overhauled to ensure proper meal assignment. The implementation wasn't smooth. Initial confusion led to midshipmen receiving incorrect meal types. Kitchen staff struggled to manage the increased complexity. Some company officers resisted the additional coordination requirements. But Hargrove's meticulous planning and relentless problem-solving gradually overcame these obstacles. By February 1944, the system was operating as designed. Despite a 20% reduction in overall food allocation, the Academy maintained full training intensity. Medical examinations showed midshipmen remaining in excellent physical condition. Waste was dramatically reduced as meals were optimized for actual requirements rather than standardized portions. The success of this system attracted attention from the highest levels of naval leadership. In March 1944, Fleet Admiral Ernest King, then serving as Chief of Naval Operations, and after whom the Academy Dining Hall would later be named, visited Annapolis specifically to observe Hargrove's innovation in action. Admiral King, known for his demanding standards and critical assessments, spent an entire day observing meal service, reviewing nutrition data, and questioning staff about implementation challenges. At the conclusion of his visit, he summoned Hargrove to a private meeting. "Chief, what you've accomplished here isn't just feeding midshipmen," Admiral King reportedly told him. "You've demonstrated a principle that applies across warfare. Resources aren't just about quantity, they're about application. Using limited resources optimally is more effective than using abundant resources inefficiently." This observation captured the essence of Hargrove's innovation. He hadn't solved the supply problem, he had redefined it as an allocation problem. By precisely matching resources to requirements, he had created sufficiency from scarcity. Admiral King directed that Hargrove's system be documented and studied for potential implementation across naval training facilities. More significantly, he recommended Hargrove for a commission as a Supply Corps officer, an extraordinary recognition for a chief petty officer who had never attended college. In April 1944, William Hargrove received his commission as lieutenant, junior grade, in the Supply Corps, becoming one of the few enlisted personnel to receive a wartime commission without prior college education. His advancement recognized not just his technical innovation, but his leadership in creating solutions where others saw only constraints. The consequences and legacy of Hargrove's innovations extended far beyond the war years. His nutritional optimization approach became standard practice at the Academy, continuing well into the 1950s. The mobile serving cart system he developed remained in use until the major renovation of dining facilities in the 1970s. And his color-coded meal differentiation concept influenced institutional feeding approaches throughout the Navy. After the war, as the Academy returned to normal operations, Hargrove's emergency measures were gradually phased out. The improvised supply network became unnecessary as normal distribution channels resumed. The converted garden areas were restored to their original decorative purpose. But the principles he established, efficiency, optimization, and resourcefulness, became permanent parts of Academy culture. Hargrove himself continued his naval career, rising to the rank of commander before his retirement in 1962. His expertise in institutional feeding made him a valued advisor during the post-war expansion of the Navy's shore installations. Several of his innovations were incorporated into the Navy's revised food service manuals, influencing how sailors were fed throughout the fleet. In 1958, when the expanded Midshipmen's Mess Hall was formally dedicated as King Hall, named after Fleet Admiral Ernest King, Hargrove was invited as an honored guest. During the ceremony, Admiral Arleigh Burke, then serving as Chief of Naval Operations, specifically cited Hargrove's wartime innovations as exemplifying the creative problem-solving the Navy sought to instill in its officers. What Commander Hargrove accomplished during those difficult war years, Admiral Burke noted, wasn't just feeding midshipmen. He demonstrated that leadership isn't about having perfect conditions or abundant resources. It's about finding solutions where others see only problems, about serving the mission even when conventional methods fail. This principle became part of the leadership curriculum at the Academy. Case studies based on Hargrove's wartime innovations were incorporated into courses on resource management and adaptive leadership. Midshipmen studied how his willingness to challenge conventional approaches while maintaining focus on the underlying mission exemplified the initiative expected of naval officers. Perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from those he had served. In 1972, at a reunion of wartime Academy graduates, a special dinner honored Hargrove's contribution to their education. Admiral James Stockdale, by then a highly decorated Vietnam veteran and former prisoner of war, delivered a moving tribute. "When I was held captive in Hanoi," Stockdale told the assembled officers, "I often reflected on lessons learned at Annapolis. Among the most valuable was watching Chief Hargrove, as he was then, refuse to accept that his mission couldn't be accomplished because of resource constraints. He showed us that with creativity, courage, and commitment to purpose, seemingly impossible challenges can be overcome." Stockdale's words captured the enduring impact of Hargrove's leadership. Beyond the practical improvements in feeding midshipmen, he had provided a living example of problem-solving under pressure, a lesson as valuable to future officers as any formal instruction. Hargrove remained characteristically modest about his achievements. In a 1975 interview, when asked about his wartime innovations, he deflected personal credit. "I just did what needed doing," he said. "The real story isn't what I did. It's what those midshipmen did after they left Annapolis. They commanded ships in the Pacific, led Marines on Iwo Jima, piloted aircraft over Germany. My job was making sure they had the nutrition they needed to learn those skills. Their achievements were the real outcome of our work in the kitchens." This perspective reflected Hargrove's understanding of his role in the larger war effort. He viewed his work not as separate from combat operations, but as an essential supporting element, just as logistics and supply chains are integral to military success. In 1983, when the Academy underwent a major renovation of its food service facilities, the main production kitchen was named the Hargrove Galley in recognition of his lasting influence. A plaque at the entrance summarizes his contribution. "In the darkest days of World War II, when resources were scarce and demands were great, William Hargrove proved that creativity and determination can overcome any shortage. His innovations fed bodies, but more importantly, they demonstrated principles that continue to nourish the spirit of naval leadership. Today, many of Hargrove's specific techniques have been superseded by technological advances and changing institutional structures. But his core principle, that effective leadership finds ways to accomplish the mission regardless of constraints, remains a central tenet of naval education. Visitors to the Naval Academy who dine in King Hall rarely know the story behind the remarkably efficient operation that serves thousands of midshipmen in minutes. They might notice the well-organized serving system, the nutritionally balanced meals, the minimal waste. All legacies of innovations developed under wartime pressure by a chief petty officer who refused to accept that his mission couldn't be accomplished. The true measurement of William Hargrove's impact lies not in the meals served during those difficult war years, but in the officers those meals nourished. Men who went on to command ships, lead Marines, and eventually guide the Navy through the challenges of the Cold War and beyond. Every time a naval officer finds a creative solution to a seemingly insurmountable problem, they extend Hargrove's legacy. In our modern era of abundance, it's easy to forget the lessons learned during times of scarcity. The story of how the Naval Academy fed its midshipmen during World War II offers more than historical interest. It provides a timeless reminder that human ingenuity, properly applied, can overcome even the most daunting resource limitations. As we face our own contemporary challenges, from climate change to pandemic response to economic inequalities, we would do well to remember the example set in a wartime kitchen at Annapolis. Resources matter, but how we apply them matters more. Rules and procedures serve purposes, but mission accomplishment sometimes requires thinking beyond them. And most importantly, leadership isn't demonstrated during times of abundance, but during moments of scarcity and constraint. William Hargrove never commanded a ship, never led troops in combat, never made strategic decisions that directly influenced the course of the war. But through his dedication to feeding the future officers who would do those things, he contributed to victory as surely as any battlefield commander. His story reminds us that heroism takes many forms, and that sometimes the most significant contributions come from those working far from the spotlight. Would you have broken with convention as Hargrove did, risking your career to ensure the mission succeeded? Or would you have followed established procedures even if they failed to meet essential needs? This question transcends its historical context to challenge us today. In our own lives and work, are we bound by systems and rules or guided by underlying purpose? Share this story so others remember that true leadership isn't about having perfect conditions or abundant resources. It's about finding ways to succeed despite constraints. It's about understanding that rules and procedures exist to serve missions, not to constrain them. And most importantly, it's about recognizing that in times of greatest challenge, innovation and determination can transform scarcity into sufficiency.